Why would a 7 months pregnant widow crawl into a stranger's bed in the middle of a blizzard? Because sometimes survival doesn't care about your reputation. This is the story of Mara Dalton, a woman the world had already written off. Too big, too weak, too broken to make it through winter alone. But when you've got nothing left to lose, you find out what you're really made of. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. 3 days before Mara Dalton found herself pressed against a stranger's chest in a freezing cabin, she'd been standing in the parlor of her late husband's house, watching his brother divide up her life like it was an estate sale. "The wagon goes to Thomas," Gerald Dalton announced, not even looking at her. "He'll need it for hauling timber come spring." Mara stood by the window, one hand resting on the swell of her belly, the other gripping the back of a chair that had belonged to her mother. Outside, Iron Hollow stretched across the valley in shades of gray and white, wood smoke rising from chimneys, frozen mud rutted in the streets, the kind of cold that made your bones ache just looking at it. "That wagon was Daniel's," she said quietly. Gerald finally glanced up from his ledger. He was a thinner, meaner version of her dead husband. Same dark hair, same sharp jaw, but where Daniel had carried softness in his eyes, Gerald only had calculation. "Was being the relevant word, Mara. Daniel's gone. Been gone 6 weeks now." He tapped his pencil against the page. "The estate needs settling." "I'm his wife." "Widow," Gerald corrected. "And you'll be provided for. Don't worry about that. There's the small cabin on the North Ridge. You can have that. Firewood for the winter. A stipend from the timber operation once it's running again." Mara felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. "The Northridge cabin is 4 miles from town. 3.5. Through woods, in winter, with a baby coming." Gerald set down his pencil with exaggerated patience. "Mara, let's be practical. You can't stay here. This house goes with the timber business, and Thomas needs to be close to the operation. The north cabin is perfectly adequate for your situation. Your situation. Like her pregnancy was some kind of unfortunate condition, rather than the child she and Daniel had tried for 3 years to conceive." "I could help with the business," Mara offered, hating how small her voice sounded. "Daniel taught me the books. I know the accounts, the suppliers. Thomas will handle the business side." Gerald's tone said the discussion was over. "The cabin will suit you fine. It's not like you'll be doing much moving around anyway, given your, well..." His eyes flicked down to her body, then quickly away. There it was. The thing no one said directly, but everyone thought. Mara had never been a small woman. Even before the pregnancy, she'd been what the town ladies called substantial when they were being kind, and other things when they weren't. Daniel had loved her anyway, loved her fiercely, actually, in his quiet way. He'd trace the curves of her hips in the dark and tell her she was beautiful, and she'd almost believed him. But Daniel was dead. Thrown from a horse 6 weeks ago, neck broken before he hit the ground. And without him, Mara was just the fat widow who couldn't pull her weight. "When do I need to be out?" she asked. "End of the week should do it. Thomas and Mary will be moving their things on Sunday." 4 days. She had 4 days to pack up 7 years of marriage and disappear into the woods like some kind of exile. "Fine," Mara said, because what else could she say? She turned back to the window. "It's for the best," Gerald added, with the kind of false kindness that made her want to throw something. "You'll have privacy out there, peace and quiet, room to manage things when the baby comes." Manage things. Like she was going to give birth alone in a cabin in the woods, and somehow that was a blessing rather than a death sentence. After Gerald left, Mara stood in that parlor for a long time, watching the afternoon light fade across Iron Hollow. She could see the general store from here, and the church with its white steeple, and the row of neat houses where the respectable families lived. Places she'd walked freely just 2 months ago, when she'd been Daniel Dalton's wife, instead of just the pregnant woman taking up space. She pressed both hands against her belly, felt the baby shift and kick. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "I promise." But promises were cheap when you had no idea how to keep them. The next morning, Mara started packing. It didn't take as long as she'd thought. Most of the good furniture belonged to the Dalton family, not to her and Daniel specifically. Her clothes fit in 2 trunks, her mother's dishes wrapped in newspaper. the wedding quilt her grandmother had made, books, a few photographs. She was wrapping the photographs when someone knocked. "It's open," she called. The door swung wide and Catherine Mills swept in, bringing cold air and the scent of rose water. Catherine was everything Mara wasn't. Tall, slender, elegant, even in a simple wool dress. They'd been friends once, before Mara married Daniel, before Catherine married the bank manager and decided she needed a better class of companion. "I heard the news," Catherine said, pulling off her gloves. "About the cabin. Mara, I'm so sorry." "Are you?" Catherine had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Of course I am. It seems harsh, especially in your condition." "My condition." Mara set down the photograph she'd been holding, her and Daniel on their wedding day, both of them grinning like idiots. "That's the second time someone's called it that in 2 days. Like being pregnant is some kind of scandal. That's not what I meant. What did you mean, Catherine?" Silence. Catherine twisted her gloves in her hands. "I came to offer help," she said finally. "George and we could talk to Gerald. Maybe convince him to let you stay in town, at least until after the baby comes. There's the boarding house, or what? Someone's spare room? A corner in the church basement?" Mara stood up, felt her back protest the sudden movement. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It is, and we both know it." Mara moved to the window again. Outside, snow had started falling, light flakes that wouldn't amount to much, but still, winter was coming. Everyone could feel it. "You want to know the truth, Catherine? The real reason Gerald's shipping me off to that cabin?" Catherine didn't answer. "It's because he thinks I won't survive the winter out there. Too soft, too weak, too big to manage on my own." Mara turned to face her old friend. "And you know what the worst part is? Part of me thinks he might be right." "Don't say that." "Why not? It's what everyone's thinking. I see it in their faces when they look at me." Poor Mara, such a shame. She was always so delicate. The word tasted bitter, which is just a polite way of saying I'm useless. Catherine's mouth opened, closed. She looked genuinely distressed, which was something at least. "You're not useless," she said quietly. "You're grieving. You're scared. Anyone would be. But anyone isn't 7 months pregnant and built like a barn, are they?" "Mara, you should go, Catherine, before the snow gets worse." Mara turned back to her packing. "Thank you for the offer, really, but I don't think there's anything you can do." She heard Catherine leave, the door closing softly behind her. Then she sat down heavily in Daniel's old chair and let herself cry for exactly 5 minutes, timed by the clock on the mantel, before she wiped her face and got back to work. Crying didn't pack trunks. Crying didn't chop firewood. Crying didn't keep you alive through a mountain winter. By Thursday, everything Mara owned was loaded onto a borrowed wagon. Gerald had hired a local man named Jim Carver to drive her out to the North Ridge cabin and help her unload. Jim was 60 if he was a day, weathered and quiet, the kind of man who'd spent his whole life doing hard work without complaint. He didn't say much as they loaded the wagon, but Mara caught him looking at her belly once or twice, his expression unreadable. "Heard you're heading up to the old Fletcher place," he said finally, tying down the last trunk. If that's what they're calling it. "Been empty 3 years since Fletcher died." Jim tested the knots. "Not a bad cabin, if you don't mind the isolation." "I don't have much choice about it." "No, I suppose you don't." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, didn't make a production of it, just offered his hand and let her find her balance. "You know how to keep a fire going? I've kept fires before." "Mountain fires are different. Wind comes through different. You need to bank it right or you'll wake up frozen." He climbed up beside her, took the reins. "I'll show you when we get there." They rode in silence through Iron Hollow. Mara kept her eyes forward, didn't look at the people watching from windows and doorways. Let them stare, let them whisper. In a few hours she'd be gone, and they could forget she existed. The road out of town was barely more than a track, winding up through pine forest that got thicker the higher they climbed. Snow crunched under the wagon wheels. The temperature dropped with every mile. "Storm coming," Jim observed, squinting at the sky. "Big one by the feel of it." "How big?" "The kind that shuts the pass for weeks." He glanced at her. "You got supplies? Food? Firewood? That sort of thing?" Gerald said the cabin was stocked. Gerald says a lot of things. Jim was quiet for a moment. I'll see what you've got when we get there. Make sure it's enough. They reached the cabin just after noon. It sat in a small clearing backed up against the mountain slope, surrounded by pines, smoke-stained chimney, shuttered windows, a porch that sagged on one side. Not the worst Mara had seen, but not good either. Jim helped her down and they started unloading. The cabin's single room was cold and dim, smelling of dust and old wood smoke. Someone had left a stack of firewood by the hearth and a few supplies on the rough shelf that served as a kitchen. Flour, salt, a sack of beans, some jerky. Not much. This won't last you 2 weeks, Jim said flatly, much less a whole winter. I'll manage. How? He turned to face her. You planning to hunt? Trap? Walk 4 miles to town and back through snow every time you need food? Mara felt her throat tighten. I said I'll manage. Jim studied her for a long moment, then sighed. There's a man lives further up the mountain, mile, maybe mile and a half north of here, name's Rowan Hale. I've heard of him. Everyone in Iron Hollow had heard of Rowan Hale, the hermit, the man who'd killed someone in town 5 years ago and fled into the mountains rather than face trial. Or maybe he'd been acquitted and just chose to disappear. Stories varied. He's rough, Jim continued, and he doesn't like visitors. But he knows this mountain better than anyone alive. He traps, hunts, keeps himself through winter without any help from town. He paused. If things get bad, really bad, you could try going to him. You want me to ask a murderer for help? I want you to survive. Jim's voice was gentle but firm. And Rowan Hale isn't what people say he is. He was acquitted, for one thing. Only left town because folks wouldn't let him be. As far as I know, he's just a man who wants to be left alone. Then why would he help me? Can't say he would, but it's an option. Better than dying alone out here. They finished unloading in silence. Jim showed her how to bank the fire like he'd promised, checked the chimney for blockages, tested the door latch. Before he left, he set a small bundle on the table. Extras from my place, he said. Dried venison, some cornmeal. It's not much. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He pulled on his gloves. Storm's going to hit tomorrow, maybe the day after. Stay inside when it does. Don't try to go anywhere. I won't. And if you need help, I'll be fine, Jim. He looked like he wanted to argue, but finally just nodded and headed for the wagon. Mara stood in the doorway and watched him drive away, the sound of wheels and hooves fading into the forest. Then she closed the door and looked at her new home. 1 room, 1 window, 1 chance. That night, Mara lay in the narrow bed and felt the baby move inside her. Strong kicks now, getting stronger every day. She tried to imagine herself doing this, living here, surviving winter, giving birth alone. Raising a child in this isolated place. She couldn't picture it. Outside, the wind picked up. The cabin creaked and groaned. Somewhere in the darkness, an animal howled. Wolf or coyote, she couldn't tell. Mara pulled the wedding quilt tighter and tried not to think about how completely, utterly alone she was. The storm hit the next afternoon. Mara had spent the morning organizing her supplies, trying to make the meager provisions stretch in her mind. The math didn't work no matter how she calculated it. 2 weeks of food, maybe 3 if she rationed carefully. After that, what? Wait for the snow to melt? Hope someone from town remembered she existed? She was stirring a thin soup over the fire when the first serious gust hit the cabin. The whole structure shuddered. Snow began falling so thick she couldn't see the trees 20 feet away. Within an hour, the world outside disappeared into white noise. Mara fed the fire, checked the door and shutters, tried to stay calm. Jim had said storms like this lasted days sometimes. She had wood, she had food, she'd be fine. But by nightfall, the temperature inside the cabin had dropped despite the fire. Wind found every crack and gap in the walls, bringing cold air that no amount of banking could fight. Mara wrapped herself in every blanket she owned and still shivered. The baby kicked hard, as if protesting the cold. I know, Mara whispered, rubbing her belly. I know, little one. I'm trying. She must have dozed off sitting up, because she woke to find the fire nearly out and the cabin so cold her breath made clouds in the air. Her hand shook as she added wood, blew on the embers, coaxed flame back to life. How was it only the first night? Morning came gray and brutal. The storm hadn't let up at all. If anything, it had gotten worse. Snow was piled against the door so high Mara couldn't push it open. The shutters rattled like they might tear off. And the cold. She'd never felt cold like this. The kind that made you slow and stupid. The kind that whispered you should just sleep, just rest, just let go. Mara forced herself to eat some jerky and cornmeal mush, forced herself to stay awake and moving, but her body felt so heavy. Pregnancy had always made her tired, but this was different. This was the exhaustion of fighting a battle you were slowly losing. By the second night of the storm, she faced the truth. She wasn't going to make it. Not here. Not alone. Not through a winter of storms like this. She could stay in the cabin and hope the storm broke soon. Hope someone from town thought to check on her. Hope she didn't go into early labor from stress and cold and fear. Or she could do something no one expected. Mara sat up in bed, her decision made with a clarity that surprised her. She would go to Rowan Hale. It was insane. The man was a stranger at best, dangerous at worst. His cabin was over a mile away through storm conditions that had already nearly killed her just sitting still. And she was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, with no real supplies for the journey. But staying here meant dying slowly. At least movement gave her a chance. At first light, or what passed for it in the storm, Mara began to prepare. She wrapped herself in every warm thing she owned, layered until she could barely move, packed what little food she had left in a canvas sack, tied a rope around her waist in case she got disoriented in the snow. She'd tie the other end to trees as she walked, give herself something to follow back if she couldn't find Hale's cabin. It was a terrible plan. It was the only plan she had. She stood at the door for a long moment, both hands on her belly. "This is going to be bad," she told the baby. "But we're going to make it. You hear me? We're going to make it." Then Mara Dalton opened the door and walked into the storm. The cold hit like a physical blow. Wind tore at her wrappings, drove snow into her face so hard she had to squint to see anything. The world was white chaos in every direction. Mara tied her rope to the porch post and started walking north. Each step was a fight. Snow came up past her knees in places, forcing her to wade rather than walk. The weight of her pregnancy threw off her balance. Wind pushed her sideways, tried to knock her down. And the cold wanted her dead. She fell twice in the first 100 yards, struggled back to her feet both times, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her face went numb. Her hand stopped feeling the rope even though she could see herself gripping it. Keep moving. That was the only thought she allowed. Keep moving or die. Mara lost track of time. Might have been walking for 20 minutes, might have been 2 hours. Everything was just white and cold, and the desperate animal need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. She fell again. Harder this time. Lay in the snow for what felt like forever before she found the strength to push herself up. Her rope had run out. She'd reached the end of what she'd brought. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat. She was untethered now, completely alone in the storm. If she got turned around, she'd never find her way back. Never find Hale's cabin. Would just walk in circles until she collapsed and the snow buried her. The baby kicked weakly. "I know," Mara sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But she couldn't stop. Stopping meant dying, so she walked and walked. And when she thought she couldn't take another step, when her legs finally refused to hold her weight, when she fell face first into the snow and couldn't get up, she saw it. A darker shape in the white, angular, solid. A cabin. Mara crawled, actually got down on her hands and knees and crawled through the snow like an animal, driven by pure survival instinct. The cabin got closer. Closer. She could see a door, shuttered windows, smoke from the chimney. Someone was home. She reached the porch, pulled herself up the steps. Her frozen hands couldn't make a fist to knock, so she kicked the door instead. Once. Twice. It opened. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, and several days of beard, eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked down at her with an expression Mara couldn't read. "Please," she managed through numb lips. "Please, help me." The man, Rowan Hale, it had to be, stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Then he reached down, got his hands under her arms, and dragged her inside. The warmth of the cabin hit Mara like a wave. She heard the door close, felt herself being lowered to the floor near a fire. Rough hands pulled at her frozen wrappings, stripping away layers. "What the hell were you thinking?" The voice was rough. angry. Walking in this? You could have died. I know, Mara whispered. You're pregnant. I know. Then you're even more of an idiot than I thought. But his hands were gentle as he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Don't move. I need to check for frostbite. Mara sat there, shaking violently, as Rowan Hale examined her hands and face and feet. His cabin was small, but well kept. One room like hers, but warmer, better insulated. Supplies organized on shelves, furs hanging from the walls, the smell of wood smoke and something cooking. You're lucky, Rowan said finally. Fingers and toes all look okay. Face is going to hurt like hell when it thaws, but you'll live. He sat back on his heels. Who are you? Mara. Mara Dalton. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Daniel Dalton's widow. You knew him. Knew of him. Heard he died. Rowan stood, moved to the fire to stir whatever was in the pot hanging there. That doesn't explain what you're doing walking through a blizzard to my cabin. So Mara told him. About the cabin on the North Ridge, about Gerald and the estate, about realizing she couldn't survive the winter alone and making the desperate choice to come here. Rowan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So you want what, exactly? He asked finally. Shelter until the storm passes? I don't know. Mara pulled the blanket tighter. I couldn't stay there and die. I had to try something. Fair enough. He ladled soup into a wooden bowl, handed it to her. Eat, then sleep. We'll figure out the rest when you're not half frozen. The soup was venison and root vegetables, thick and hot, and the best thing Mara had ever tasted. She ate slowly, feeling strength trickle back into her body. Rowan busied himself around the cabin, not looking at her directly, but clearly aware of her presence. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with the beard and the weathered look that came from living rough. Why'd you let me in? Mara asked quietly. He glanced at her. What? You could have shut the door, told me to go away. Why didn't you? Rowan was quiet for a moment. Because you knocked, he said finally. Because you asked. Because... He shook his head. Doesn't matter. You're here now. People in town say you're dangerous. People in town say a lot of things. Are they true? Some of them. He met her eyes directly. I killed a man 5 years ago. Shot him dead in the street. So yeah, I'm dangerous if you cross me. But you haven't crossed me, and you're pregnant and half frozen, so I think you're probably safe enough. It should have terrified her. Instead, Mara felt something almost like relief. At least he was honest. The trial, she started. She acquitted, self-defense. He went for his gun first. I was faster. Rowan stirred the fire. Didn't matter. His family had money, had influence. They couldn't get me legally, so they made it clear I wasn't welcome in Iron Hollow anymore. He shrugged. Suited me fine. Never liked towns anyway. You've been up here alone for 5 years? More or less. Don't you get lonely? Rowan looked at her like she'd asked if he breathed air. Every damn day, he said. But lonely's better than being around people who want you dead. Mara finished her soup in silence. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain. But in here, with the fire crackling and the cabin warm, she felt safer than she had in weeks. You can have the bed, Rowan said, nodding toward the corner where a simple frame held what looked like a reasonably clean mattress. I'll sleep on the floor. I can't take your bed. You're pregnant and you just walked through a blizzard. Take the damn bed. His tone didn't allow argument. Mara was too exhausted to fight. She let Rowan help her to the bed, let herself sink into the mattress and furs. Her whole body ached, but the warmth and safety made even the aching feel distant. Thank you, she whispered. Rowan didn't answer, but when she looked, he was spreading his own blankets by the fire, getting ready to sleep. Mara closed her eyes and let herself fall. Mara woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was unfamiliar, rough-hewn logs, darker than the ones in her cabin. Then memory flooded back. The storm, the walk. Rowan Hale. She sat up carefully, her body protesting every movement. Her muscles felt like they'd been wrung out and left to dry. Her face burned where the cold had bitten deepest. But she was alive and warm, and that was more than she'd had any right to expect. The cabin was empty except for her. Through the shuttered window, she could see gray daylight, which meant she'd slept through the night and most of the morning. The fire had been built up recently. Someone had been tending it while she slept. Mara pushed herself out of bed, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and moved to the window. She cracked the shutter open. Snow. Everywhere. The storm had buried the world in white that came up past the cabin's window ledge. Drifts piled higher than a man's head in places. And in the clearing in front of the cabin, Rowan Hale was splitting wood like the world depended on it. He'd stripped down to just a shirt despite the cold. And even from here, Mara could see the muscles in his back and shoulders working with each swing of the axe. Methodical. Efficient. The kind of work a man did when he'd been doing it so long he didn't have to think about it anymore. She watched him for a moment, feeling oddly intrusive. Then the baby kicked hard enough to make her wince, reminding her that she had more immediate concerns than studying her reluctant host. The door opened and Rowan came in carrying an armload of split wood. He stopped when he saw her standing there. "You're up," he said. "I am. Sorry I slept so long." "You needed it." He dumped the wood by the hearth, brushed snow off his shoulders. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a horse, but alive." Mara managed a small smile. Better than the alternative. Rowan grunted something that might have been agreement and started building up the fire. His movements were practiced, careful. Everything about the way he moved through this space spoke of years of solitary routine. "The storm," Mara ventured. "Is it still going? Probably will be for another day or two." He didn't look at her. "You're stuck here until it breaks." "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For this. Showing up. Disrupting your life." Now he did look at her, his expression unreadable. "You didn't disrupt anything. I chop wood and wait for storms to pass, whether you're here or not." He stood, wiped his hands on his pants. "You hungry?" Mara's stomach answered for her with a low growl that made her flush with embarrassment. Rowan's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'll take that as a yes." He made breakfast with the same efficiency he did everything else. Cornmeal porridge with dried berries, venison jerky on the side, strong tea that tasted like pine needles. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite sides of the cabin, Mara on the bed, Rowan on a stool by the fire. "You live like this all the time?" Mara asked finally. "Alone up here?" "Mostly." "Don't you ever go to town?" "Twice a year. Trade furs and meat for supplies I can't make myself. Get in, get out, don't talk to anyone if I can help it." He scraped the bottom of his bowl. "Works fine." "Sounds lonely." "You said that last night." "It's still true." Rowan set his bowl aside, studied her with those gray eyes that gave away nothing. "You planning to psychoanalyze me, Mrs. Dalton? Because I can put you back out in the snow if that's how this is going to go." "It's just Mara. And no, I'm not planning anything." She wrapped her hands around her tea, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "I'm just trying to figure you out." "Nothing to figure. I'm a man who lives alone because I like it that way." "Do you? Like it?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, wind howled against the cabin walls. "Most days," he said finally. "Some days it's harder than others, but it's better than the alternative." "Which is?" "Being around people who think they know you based on one bad day 5 years ago." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Being reminded every time you walk down the street that you killed someone, even if it was self-defense, even if a judge said it was justified." He stood abruptly. "I'm going to check the trap lines before the snow gets worse. Don't open the door for anyone while I'm gone." Who would come up here in this weather? No one with good intentions. Rowan pulled on a heavy coat, wrapped a scarf around his neck. "Keep the fire going. There's more wood by the hearth if you need it." Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone in the cabin with her thoughts and the sound of the storm. She spent the morning trying to make herself useful. Washed the breakfast dishes in a bucket of melted snow. Straightened the bed she'd slept in. Organized the supplies on Rowan's shelves, not because they needed it, but because sitting still made her think too much about how precarious her situation really was. She was 7 months pregnant, stranded in a stranger's cabin with no clear plan for what came next. Even if the storm broke tomorrow, she couldn't go back to that freezing cabin on the North Ridge. But she also couldn't stay here indefinitely, imposing on a man who clearly valued his solitude. The baby kicked, hard. "I know." Mara murmured, rubbing her belly. I know we're in trouble. I'm working on it. Rowan returned near dusk, hauling 3 rabbits and a grouse. He hung them from hooks near the door without comment, then stripped off his coat and moved to warm his hands by the fire. Successful hunt? Mara ventured. Successful enough. He held his hands closer to the flames. We won't starve anyway. Do you ever worry about it? Starving? Every winter. But I've made it through 10 of them so far, so the odds seem decent. I'll make it through this one, too. He glanced at her. You know how to dress game? Mara blinked. What? The rabbits. You know how to skin and clean them? No. Daniel always handled that when we... She stopped. Daniel was gone. What Daniel used to do didn't matter anymore. I could learn. Rowan studied her for a moment, then nodded. Come on then, I'll show you. It was gruesome work. Mara had eaten plenty of rabbit in her life, but she'd never seen the whole process of turning a living creature into meat for the table. Rowan walked her through it with clinical detachment, where to cut, how to pull the skin, what parts to keep, and what to discard. You're doing it wrong, he said when she fumbled the second rabbit. Here, like this. He moved behind her, wrapped his hands around hers, guided her through the motions. Mara felt the solid warmth of him at her back, the rough calluses on his palms. It was the closest she'd been to another person since Daniel died. Got it? Rowan asked. I think so. He stepped back, left her to finish on her own. Mara worked slowly, carefully, trying not to think about the fact that a week ago she'd been a respectable widow in a respectable town. Now she was standing in a mountain cabin skinning rabbits with a man people called a murderer. Life had a way of humbling you. They cooked the rabbit for dinner with wild onions and some kind of root Rowan had stored. It was good, better than good actually. Mara ate until she was full for the first time in days. You're a good cook, she said. I don't starve. That's about all I aim for. Still, this is the best meal I've had since... She trailed off. Since your husband died. Yeah. Rowan was quiet while he chewed. Then, what was he like, Daniel? The question surprised her. Kind? Mara said after a moment. Quiet. He liked working with his hands, building things, fixing things. He could spend hours just working on some project in his shop, perfectly content. She smiled at the memory. He wasn't exciting, wasn't the kind of man who swept you off your feet, but he was steady, reliable. And he loved me even though what? Even though I'm not exactly what most men want. Mara gestured at herself. I'm too big, too plain, too much trouble. That what people told you? They didn't have to tell me. I have eyes. Rowan set down his bowl, fixed her with that steady gray gaze. Let me tell you something, Mara Dalton. Anyone who judges a person's worth by how they look is too stupid to be worth listening to in the first place. Easy for you to say. You're not... What? Not fat? His voice was harsh. You're right, I'm not. But I am a killer, at least in everyone's eyes. So trust me when I say I know what it's like to have people make assumptions about who you are based on things that don't tell the whole story. Mara looked away, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. I'm sorry, that was thoughtless. It was honest. I'd rather have honest than polite. He stood, started clearing the dishes. You should rest. Long day tomorrow. Doing what? Teaching you how to survive up here if you're staying. He glanced at her. You are staying, aren't you? At least until after the baby comes? I don't know. I can't just impose Mara. Rowan cut her off. The cabin on the North Ridge will kill you before spring. We both know it. And unless you've got somewhere else to go, this is where you are. He paused. I'm not thrilled about it, but I'm not going to send a pregnant woman to her death either. So we make the best of it until the snow melts and you can figure out something better. It wasn't a warm invitation. Wasn't even particularly friendly, but it was honest and practical, and more than anyone else had offered her. Okay, Mara said quietly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're going to earn your keep. The next morning, true to his word, Rowan started teaching her. First lesson, keeping the fire alive. Not just feeding it logs whenever it started to die, but understanding how to bank it at night so it would last until morning, how to read the smoke and know when the chimney needed clearing, how to conserve wood without freezing. Fire is life up here, Rowan explained, crouched by the hearth. You let it die in the middle of the night. You might not wake up. Understand? Mara nodded, watching how he arranged the logs. How do you do it when you're alone? Wake up to tend it? Practice. After a while, your body just knows when it's time. He stood, brushed ash off his hands. You'll learn. Second lesson? Water. There was a stream 100 yards from the cabin, but it was frozen solid now. Rowan showed her how to collect clean snow, how to melt it without wasting fuel, how to store it so it wouldn't freeze again. Never eat snow directly, he said. Drops your core temperature too fast. Always melt it first. I knew that. You'd be surprised how many people forget when they're desperate. Third lesson, food preservation. Rowan's cabin had a small root cellar dug into the mountainside, accessible through a trapdoor in the floor. He took her down there with a lantern, showed her the stores he'd built up over the fall. Dried meat here, roots and vegetables here, preserved berries in these jars. He pointed to each section. You ration it right, this'll last one person through winter with some to spare. 2 people, he shrugged. We'll make it work. How long did it take you to put all this together? Years. You don't build up stores like this in one season. Rowan started back up the ladder. That's the problem with you people in town. You think you can just buy your way through winter. Up here, winter doesn't care about your money. Mara followed him up, her belly making the climb awkward. You really don't like town, do you? I don't like what town represents. All those people pressed together, judging each other, creating problems that wouldn't exist if everyone just minded their own business. He offered his hand to help her up the last rung. Give me honest wilderness any day. At least out here, things that want to kill you are straightforward about it. By afternoon, the storm finally started to break. The wind died down, the snow thinned to flurries, and for the first time in 3 days, Mara could see the sky. It'll clear by tomorrow, Rowan said, looking out the window. Then we can get a better sense of what the damage is. Damage? To your cabin. Storm like this, wind could have torn the roof off, collapsed a wall. We should check it before you assume you've got nothing to go back to. The thought of going back made Mara's chest tighten. And if it's fine? The cabin? Then you decide what you want to do. Rowan turned to face her. Stay here, go back there, try to make it to town. Your choice. But you should make it with all the information. That night, Mara lay in Rowan's bed again. He'd insisted, despite her protests, and stared at the ceiling. The baby was active, rolling and kicking like it had somewhere important to be. She put both hands on her belly and tried to imagine the future. 2 months until the baby came, maybe less. She couldn't picture giving birth in that cold cabin on the ridge, couldn't picture doing it alone, but she also couldn't picture staying here permanently, disrupting Rowan's carefully constructed solitude. What do we do? She whispered to the baby. What the hell do we do? No answer, just more kicking. Across the cabin, Rowan lay on his blankets by the fire. Mara could tell by his breathing that he wasn't asleep either. Can I ask you something? She said into the darkness. Depends on the question. The man you killed. What happened? Silence. Long enough that Mara thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, his name was Richard Brennan. Rich family, owned half the businesses in Iron Hollow. He was drunk. I was walking home from trading furs. He said something about my mother. She'd died that winter. And I told him to shut his mouth. Rowan's voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reciting facts about someone else's life. He went for his gun. Everyone who was there agreed on that part. He drew first, but he was drunk and slow and I was sober and angry. I put 2 bullets in him before he even cleared leather. But it was self-defense. It was. Judge agreed. But Richard's father owned the judge's debt, and even though I was acquitted, everyone knew I couldn't stay. His father made that clear. Rowan shifted in his blankets. So I left, came up here, built this cabin, figured I'd spend a winter or 2 and then move on. But you stayed. I did. Why? Another long pause. Because I realized I preferred the company of trees and animals to people. Because up here, no one expects anything from me. No one judges. No one whispers when I walk by. His voice got quieter. Up here, I can just be. Mara understood that more than he probably knew. Thank you, she said. For telling me? Don't make me regret it. She smiled into the darkness. I'll try not to. Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. Rowan was up before dawn, stoking the fire and preparing for the trek to Mara's cabin. He'd fashioned a pair of snowshoes from bent wood and sinew, and he showed her how to strap them on. They'll keep you from sinking, he explained, but they're awkward as hell if you're not used to them. We'll go slow. The journey that had nearly killed Mara 3 days ago took them less than an hour in daylight with proper equipment. Rowan led the way, breaking trail through snow that came up to his thighs in places. Mara followed in his footsteps, grateful for the path he carved. When they reached her cabin, her heart sank. The roof had partially collapsed on the north side, probably from the weight of snow. One shutter hung by a single hinge, and when Rowan forced the door open, they found the interior buried under a drift that had come through the broken roof. "Well," Rowan said, surveying the damage, "that answers that question." Mara stood in the doorway, looking at the ruins of what was supposed to have been her sanctuary. Her trunks were somewhere under that snow. Her mother's dishes. The wedding quilt. Everything she'd brought from her old life. "Can it be fixed?" she asked, even though she knew the answer. "Eventually. Spring maybe, if you had help and materials." Rowan poked at the collapsed roof section with a long stick. "But not now, not before the baby comes." "So I'm stuck." "You're stuck." Mara felt something break loose in her chest. Not quite panic, not quite relief, just acceptance of the reality she'd been trying to avoid. She had no home, no resources, no options except the mercy of a man who didn't want her there. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Stop apologizing." Rowan turned to face her. "You didn't ask for your husband to die. Didn't ask to be cast out. Didn't ask for any of this." He gestured at the ruined cabin. "Life just happened to you, same as it happens to everyone. Now you deal with it. By imposing on you. By surviving. That's all any of us are doing, surviving the best we can with what we've got." He started back toward the door. "Come on, let's see if we can salvage anything useful before the next storm hits." They dug through the snow, recovering what they could. The trunks were damaged but intact. Most of the dishes were broken. The wedding quilt was soaked through but might be salvageable if they dried it properly. Rowan loaded everything worth saving onto a makeshift sled he'd brought, then stood looking at the cabin one last time. "You know," he said, "if you'd stayed here during that storm, you'd be dead now. Just want you to know that the choice you made, the crazy, desperate choice to walk through a blizzard to find help, that's the only reason you're still breathing." Mara looked at the collapsed roof, the buried interior, and shivered despite her layers. "I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified." "Brave and terrified aren't opposites. Usually go hand in hand, actually." He picked up the sled rope. "Let's head back before we freeze." The trek back to Rowan's cabin felt longer, weighted down with salvaged belongings and the finality of what they'd found. Mara's body ached with every step, but she kept moving. What else could she do? When they finally stumbled through Rowan's door, he immediately set about hanging the wet quilt to dry and storing the recovered items. Mara sank onto the bed, exhausted. "I need to contribute something," she said. "I can't just live here doing nothing." Rowan glanced at her. "You're 7 months pregnant. What exactly do you think you should be doing?" "I don't know. Cooking, cleaning, something useful." "You want to be useful?" "Learn. Pay attention. Ask questions when you don't understand something." He hung the last of her belongings on a hook. "Knowledge is the only currency that matters up here. Everything else is just stuff." Over the next week, Mara learned. She learned how to set snares for rabbits, how to read animal tracks in the snow, how to identify which plants were safe to eat even in winter. Rowan taught her with gruff efficiency, never more patient than necessary, but never cruel either. She learned that he talked more when he was working. Explaining things gave him a framework for conversation that didn't require revealing anything personal. She learned that he got quiet when the wind picked up, like some part of him was always listening for threats. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, thrashing in his sleep by the fire until something woke him, and he'd lie there silent until morning. And Rowan learned about her too, though she suspected he didn't want to. He learned that she hummed while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her. That she slept on her left side because the baby kicked less that way. That she was stronger than she looked, stubborn enough to master the snowshoes even when they made her legs ache, determined to pull her weight despite the pregnancy. "You don't quit, do you?" he observed one afternoon, watching her practice starting a fire with flint and steel for the 20th time. Can't afford to. Mara struck the flint again, finally coaxing a spark. Quitting means dying up here, doesn't it? Usually. Then I won't quit. Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but close. Good, he said, and went back to sharpening his knife. But the easy rhythm they'd found couldn't last forever. 10 days after Mara's arrival, the temperature dropped so low that even Rowan looked concerned. The fire blazed constantly, but cold seeped through every crack in the cabin walls. Frost formed on the inside of the shutters. Their breath made clouds in the air. We need to conserve wood, Rowan said, banking the fire lower than usual. Storm's coming, bigger than the last one. Could last a week or more. A week? Mara pulled her blankets tighter. Will we have enough supplies? Food, yes. Water, yes. Wood. He looked at the dwindling stack by the hearth. We'll make it work. But that night, the temperature plummeted even further. Mara woke shivering despite every blanket she owned. The fire had been banked to almost nothing, a few glowing embers, barely any heat. She could see Rowan across the cabin, sitting up against the wall with his blankets wrapped around him. Even in the dim light, she could tell he was shaking. Rowan? Her teeth chattered. Are you okay? Fine. Go back to sleep. You're freezing. So are you. Can't do anything about it until morning. But Mara could see the truth in the rigid way he held himself, the slight tremor in his shoulders. They were both in trouble, and pride wasn't going to keep either of them alive. She made a decision. Come here, she said. What? The bed. There's room for both of us if we share body heat. The words came out shaky, embarrassed, but determined. It's basic survival, right? That's what you'd tell me if I was being stubborn about it. Rowan didn't move. Mara, I'm not asking you to compromise anything. This isn't... She took a breath. I'm just saying that we're both going to freeze if we don't do something, and this is the practical solution, isn't it? Silence stretched between them. Then Rowan stood slowly, gathered his blankets, and crossed the cabin. He stood by the bed, still hesitating. You're sure? I'm sure we'll both be dead by morning if we don't. Mara shifted to make room. Come on, before I lose my nerve. He climbed in carefully, keeping as much distance as possible in the narrow space. They lay back to back at first, each wrapped in their own blankets, the cold air still finding every gap. But slowly, inevitably, they shifted closer. Mara felt the solid warmth of Rowan's back against hers, felt him stop shaking as their combined body heat began to make a difference. She stopped shaking too. This doesn't mean anything, Rowan said quietly into the darkness. I know. I know, Rowan. It's just survival. But as Mara drifted towards sleep, pressed against another human being for the first time since Daniel died, she couldn't help but think that maybe survival was more complicated than either of them wanted to admit, because for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. And judging by the way Rowan's breathing eventually steadied and deepened, neither did he. They didn't talk about it the next morning. Rowan was up before dawn like always, building the fire back up, melting snow for water. Mara woke to find herself alone in the bed, the space beside her already cold. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from the awkward sleeping position, and watched him move through his routine like nothing had changed. Maybe nothing had. Storm's here, Rowan said without turning around. Can you hear it? Mara listened. Wind screamed against the cabin walls with a fury that made the previous storms sound like whispers. Something, a branch maybe, slammed into the roof hard enough to make her flinch. How long? She asked. Days. Maybe a week. He poured hot water into 2 cups, handed her one. We stay inside. We stay warm. We wait it out. The tea was bitter and too hot, but Mara drank it anyway. Across the cabin, Rowan was checking their supplies, doing silent calculations in his head. We have enough? She asked. We'll make it work. That seemed to be his answer to everything. We'll make it work. Like survival was just a matter of stubborn determination and careful rationing. Maybe it was. The day crawled by with painful slowness. There was only so much to do in a one-room cabin during a blizzard. Mara mended clothes that didn't really need mending. Rowan sharpened every blade he owned until they could split hairs. They ate sparingly, dried meat and the last of the root vegetables, stretched thin to make them last. By evening, the cabin felt smaller than ever. The storm raged outside, an endless howl that made conversation difficult and thought nearly impossible. Mara found herself watching Rowan more than she should have. The way his hands moved when he worked, the slight furrow between his brows when he was concentrating, the scars on his knuckles that spoke of hard years and harder choices. "You're staring," he said without looking up from the snare he was repairing. "Sorry, there's not much else to look at. There's the wall, the ceiling, the fire." He glanced at her briefly. "Plenty of options besides me." "The wall's not very interesting." "Neither am I." Mara smiled despite herself. "I don't know about that." Rowan set down the snare, studied her with those gray eyes that saw too much. "What do you want to know?" "What makes you think I want to know anything?" "Because you've been working up to asking me something for the past hour. I can tell." He leaned back against the wall. "So ask." "Might as well. We're going to be stuck in here together for days." Mara considered. There were 100 questions she could ask. About his past, his family, the life he'd left behind. But one kept pushing to the front. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Leaving town? Choosing this life?" "Every damn day." The honesty of it surprised her. "Then why stay?" "Because regret and wrong aren't the same thing." Rowan picked up the snare again, worked the sinew through with practiced fingers. "I regret that I had to kill a man. I regret that his family had enough power to drive me out even after I was cleared. I regret losing my mother's house, the life I thought I'd have." He paused. "But staying in Iron Hollow would have been worse. Living every day with people looking at me like I was a monster waiting to snap. So yeah, I regret how it happened, but I don't regret the choice I made after." "That's a lonely way to live." "Maybe, but it's honest." He met her eyes. "What about you? You regret coming here." "I regret that I had to, but no, I don't regret the choice itself." Mara put a hand on her belly, felt the baby shift. "If I'd stayed in that cabin on the ridge, we'd both be dead now. This way, at least we have a chance. This way, you're trapped in a cabin with a stranger during the worst winter in years." "I've had worse company." Rowan's mouth twitched. "That's not saying much, considering your other option was freezing to death alone." "True." Mara shifted on the bed, trying to find a position that didn't make her back ache. "But you're not as terrible as you think you are." "Give it time. We've only been stuck together for 2 weeks. 2 weeks is long enough to know if someone's going to murder you in your sleep." "Is it?" Rowan's tone was dry. "I'll keep that in mind." They fell into silence again, but it was different now, easier. Like they'd found some kind of rhythm between them that made the small space feel less oppressive. That night, when the temperature dropped again and the fire burned low, neither of them pretended there was any other option. Rowan simply gathered his blankets and climbed into the bed beside Mara, and she shifted to make room without comment. They lay back to back again, the warmth building slowly between them. Outside, the storm tried to tear the world apart. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long found something like peace in the simple act of not being alone anymore. "Mara?" Rowan's voice was quiet in the darkness. "Yeah? Thank you." "For what?" "For not making this weird." She smiled into her pillow. "Night, Rowan." "Night." The days blurred together after that. Storm, rationing, small tasks to pass the time, long silences punctuated by brief conversations that revealed more than either of them probably intended. And every night they shared the bed without discussion, without awkwardness, just two bodies trying to survive the cold. But on the fourth day, something changed. Mara woke to pain, not the normal aches and twinges of late pregnancy. This was different, a deep clenching sensation low in her belly that made her gasp and curl on her side. "No," she whispered. "No, not yet. Please, not yet." The pain eased. She lay there breathing hard, both hands pressed to her stomach. The baby kicked weakly, like it was protesting the intrusion. Across the cabin, Rowan was still asleep by the fire. They'd alternated the last 2 nights, giving each other space. Mara didn't wake him. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just her body adjusting. Maybe another contraction hit, harder this time. Mara bit down on her fist to keep from crying out. This couldn't be happening. She was only 7.5 months along, too early, too dangerous. And they were trapped in a mountain cabin during a blizzard with no doctor, no midwife, no help at all. The contraction faded. Mara counted in her head, trying to remember what she'd been told about labor. How far apart did contractions need to be before it was real? How long did you have once they started? She couldn't remember. The knowledge felt like it was swimming just out of reach, obscured by panic. 10 minutes passed. 15. Mara started to breathe easier. Maybe it was false labor. Maybe her body was just... The third contraction doubled her over. "Rowan!" she gasped. "Rowan, wake up!" He was on his feet instantly, moving to the bed. "What's wrong?" "The baby, I think..." Another wave of pain cut off her words. Rowan's face went pale. "How far apart? 10 minutes, maybe? I don't know. I didn't think..." "Okay. Okay, it's okay." He was trying to sound calm, but Mara could hear the edge of panic in his voice. "Could be false labor. Sometimes that happens, right?" "Sometimes." Mara gripped his hand as the contraction peaked, her nails digging into his skin. "But this doesn't feel false." The contraction passed. Rowan sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her hand, his expression grim. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Deliver a baby. I've helped with animals, horses, cattle, but a person... I don't either," Mara laughed, a shaky sound that bordered on hysteria. "I was supposed to have a midwife, a doctor, not this. We need to prepare anyway, just in case." Rowan stood, started moving around the cabin with forced purpose. "Clean water, clean cloth. We'll need to keep you warm, keep the baby warm when it comes." "If it comes." "When?" he corrected firmly. "We're going to assume this is real and prepare accordingly. Better to be ready and not need it than the other way around." He was right. Mara watched him gather supplies. Their cleanest blankets, strips of cloth torn from an old shirt, a knife heated in the fire and set aside to cool. He melted snow, boiled it, set it near the hearth to stay warm. His movements were efficient, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight shake in his hands when he thought she wasn't looking. He was terrified. So was she. Another contraction came 20 minutes later. Then another 15 minutes after that. They were getting closer together, lasting longer. Mara stopped trying to convince herself this was false labor and started trying to remember everything she'd ever heard about giving birth. Push when the body tells you to push. Don't push too early. Breathe. Keep breathing. The baby needs to crown. After the baby comes the afterbirth. Blood is normal. Too much blood is not. The information felt useless, like trying to build a house with just a hammer and no nails. "Talk to me," Rowan said, sitting beside her between contractions. "Keep your mind occupied." "About what?" "Anything. Tell me about Daniel. Tell me about your life before all this." So Mara talked. About meeting Daniel at a church social, about their quiet courtship, about the small house they'd made into a home, about the 3 years they'd tried for a baby, the monthly disappointments, the quiet joy when she'd finally realized she was pregnant. "He was so happy," she said, smiling at the memory even as another contraction built. "He cried. I'd never seen him cry before, not even at his mother's funeral, but he cried when I told him about the baby. He sounds like a good man." He was. The contraction hit and Mara gripped Rowan's hand, breathing through it. "He would have been a good father." "You'll be a good mother." "How do you know?" "Because you're still fighting, still trying to survive even when it would be easier to give up." Rowan wiped sweat from her forehead with a damp cloth. "That's what good parents do. They fight for their children." The contractions kept coming, closer and closer together. 6 minutes. 5. 4. The pain was constant now, a rolling wave that Mara couldn't escape. She lost track of time, lost track of everything except the fundamental struggle of her body trying to do something it wasn't quite ready for. Rowan stayed beside her the whole time. He brought her water when she could drink it, wiped her face, held her hand when the contractions got so bad she couldn't breathe. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. He was just there, solid and present, an anchor in the storm. "I need to check," he said finally, his voice apologetic. "See how far along you are." Mara nodded, too exhausted to be embarrassed. Rowan checked quickly, his face carefully neutral. You're close, he said. Almost there. How do you know? I don't. Not really. But I've seen enough animals give birth to have a rough idea. He positioned himself at the foot of the bed. Next contraction, I need you to push. Can you do that? I don't know. Yes, you do. You walked through a blizzard to find help. You survived 2 weeks in a broken cabin. You can do this too. The next contraction built like a wave cresting. Mara felt her body bear down, felt the overwhelming urge to push, even though she was terrified of what would happen if she did. Now, Rowan said. Push now. Mara pushed. The pain was blinding, all-consuming, worse than anything she'd ever felt. She screamed, didn't care that it made her sound weak, didn't care about anything except making it stop. Again, Rowan ordered. One more. Come on, Mara, you're doing it. She pushed again. And again. Time lost all meaning. There was only the endless cycle of pain and pushing, her body tearing itself apart to bring new life into the world. I can see the head, Rowan said, his voice tight with something that might have been awe. One more, come on, you're almost there. Mara didn't think she had another push in her. Her body had nothing left to give. But she found it anyway, found that last reserve of strength that she didn't know existed, and pushed with everything she had. Something gave way. The pressure released all at once, leaving her gasping and shaking, and then a cry. Thin and reedy, and the most beautiful sound Mara had ever heard. It's a girl, Rowan said, his voice rough. You have a daughter. He moved quickly, wrapping the baby in clean cloth, rubbing her tiny back to keep her crying, to keep her breathing. Mara struggled to sit up, reaching for her child with shaking hands. Rowan placed the baby in her arms carefully, like he was handling glass. She was so small, impossibly small. Her face was red and wrinkled, her tiny fists waving in the air, her mouth open in outrage at being born into a cold world. But she was breathing. She was crying. She was alive. Hi, Mara whispered, tears streaming down her face. Hi, baby girl. I'm your mama. The baby's crying softened to small, hitching breaths. Her eyes, dark and unfocused, seemed to find Mara's face. You did it, Rowan said quietly. He was sitting back on his heels, looking at mother and child with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. She's early, but she's breathing well, strong lungs. Is she okay? Really okay? I think so. Small, but... He reached out, touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. She immediately gripped it, her whole fist not quite big enough to wrap around. Yeah, I think she's okay. Mara looked down at her daughter, this tiny, perfect, impossible thing that shouldn't have survived but did. Born 2 months early in a mountain cabin during a blizzard, delivered by a man who'd never done this before, into a world that had already tried to kill them both. And yet here she was, breathing, living, fighting. She's a survivor, Mara said, just like us. What are you going to call her? Mara thought about it, about Daniel, who would never meet his daughter, about the mountain that had nearly killed them, about the storm that had brought them together. Hope, she said finally. Her name is Hope. Rowan nodded slowly. It suits her. The next hour was a blur. Rowan helped Mara deliver the afterbirth, checked to make sure there were no complications, did all the things he'd probably seen done with animals, and hoped it translated to humans. He brought clean blankets, helped Mara get comfortable, made sure the baby stayed warm. Hope nursed fitfully, her tiny mouth working at Mara's breast. It wasn't perfect, nothing about this was perfect, but it was working. The baby was feeding, getting stronger. You should rest, Rowan said, sitting beside the bed. You've been through hell. So have you. Mara looked at him, really looked. His face was drawn with exhaustion, his shirt stained with blood and fluids from the birth. His hand shook slightly when he picked up his cup of tea. Thank you, Rowan. I know you didn't sign up for any of this. Neither did you. No, but I'm glad it was you. I'm glad I didn't have to do this alone. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I haven't felt useful in a long time, he said finally. 5 years of just existing up here. Surviving, but not really living, you know? He glanced at the baby sleeping in Mara's arms. Today, I felt useful. You were more than useful. You saved her life, both our lives. We're not out of the woods yet. She's early. Anything could still... Don't! Mara cut him off gently. Don't borrow trouble. We made it this far. We'll keep making it. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but finally just nodded. You need anything? Water? Food? I need you to rest too. You've been awake for almost 24 hours. I'm fine. Rowan. He met her eyes, saw the concern there, and sighed. Okay, maybe a little rest. He settled by the fire, wrapped in his blankets, but Mara could tell he wasn't really sleeping. Every time Hope made a sound, a whimper, a sigh, the tiny snuffling noises newborns make, his eyes would open, checking, making sure they were okay. The storm finally broke 3 days later. The wind died down, the snow stopped falling, and weak sunlight filtered through the shutters. Hope had survived her first 72 hours. Every one of them touch and go, every one a small victory. She was tiny, barely 5 pounds if Mara had to guess, and she struggled with feeding. But she was determined, this little girl born too early into a world that didn't want her. She'd cry when she was hungry, settle when she was full, and sleep curled against Mara's chest like she knew that was the safest place in the world. Rowan had transformed over those 3 days. The gruff hermit who'd reluctantly taken Mara in had become something else. A caretaker, a protector, almost a partner. He'd sit with Hope while Mara slept, holding her tiny body against his chest, whispering things Mara couldn't quite hear. He'd test the temperature of water before using it for cleaning, check and double-check that Hope's makeshift cradle, fashioned from a drawer and some soft furs, was positioned safely away from drafts. You're good with her, Mara observed one afternoon, watching him rock Hope gently while Mara tried to eat something. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I, but we're figuring it out. Rowan looked down at the baby in his arms. Hope was awake, her dark eyes staring up at him with that intense focus newborns sometimes have. She's so small, he said quietly. How is anything this small even alive? Stubbornness, probably. Takes after her mother, then. Mara smiled. Maybe a little after you, too. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. I prefer determined. Stubborn. Determined. Hope made a small sound. Not quite a cry, not quite a coo. Rowan shifted her carefully, supporting her head like Mara had shown him. Hi there, little bit, he murmured. You're okay. Just waking up, that's all. Mara felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't part of the plan. Coming here was supposed to be temporary. Survival until the snow melted and she could figure out something better. Rowan was supposed to be a reluctant host, nothing more. But watching him with Hope, seeing the careful gentleness in hands that had killed a man, seeing the way he looked at this tiny baby like she was something precious and worth protecting. This was starting to feel like more than temporary, and that terrified Mara almost as much as the birth had. That night, after Hope was asleep in her drawer cradle and Mara had finally eaten a full meal, she and Rowan sat by the fire in comfortable silence. The storm might have broken, but the cold hadn't. Winter still had them locked in tight. What happens now? What? Mara asked finally. What do you mean? When spring comes, when the snow melts, what happens to us? Rowan stared into the flames. I don't know. We can't stay here forever. This is your cabin, your life. You didn't ask for... Stop. His voice was firm. Stop planning problems that don't exist yet. Spring is months away. Hope needs to get stronger. You need to recover. We focus on that. The rest... He shrugged. The rest we figure out when we get there. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan we've got. He glanced at her. Unless you've got somewhere else you're planning to go. Someone in town who's going to welcome a widow and a newborn with open arms? Mara shook her head slowly. No. No one. Then we do this day by day, storm by storm. Rowan added another log to the fire. I've got enough supplies for 3 people if we're careful. The cabin's small, but it's warm enough. And in a few weeks, maybe a month, I can start going out to check trap lines again. Hunting, building up stores for the rest of winter. You've thought about this. Of course I've thought about it. You think I haven't been lying awake at night doing the math? He leaned back against the wall. Truth is, having you and Hope here, it's not as terrible as I thought it would be. High praise. It's the best you're going to get from me. Mara smiled despite herself. I'll take it. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and Hope's small sleeping sounds. Outside, the world was still frozen and harsh. But in here, in this small cabin on the side of a mountain, something that looked almost like a family was taking shape. Broken pieces that fit together better than they should have. A widow, a hermit, a baby born too early who refused to die. Not perfect, not even close, but alive, together, surviving. And for now, that was enough. Hope was 2 weeks old when she stopped breathing. Mara woke in the middle of the night to silence, the kind of silence that was wrong, that made every instinct scream danger. She reached for the baby in the cradle beside the bed, touched her tiny chest, and felt nothing. No movement, no breath. "Rowan!" The scream tore out of her throat before she could think. "Rowan, something's wrong!" He was beside her in seconds, taking Hope from her arms. In the firelight, the baby's lips looked blue. "She's not breathing," Mara sobbed. "She's not—" Rowan didn't answer. He laid Hope on the bed, tilted her head back slightly, and covered her nose and mouth with his own mouth. Breathed gently into her lungs. Once. Twice. Nothing. He tried again. His hand shook as he positioned her tiny body, as he breathed life into her. Mara watched, frozen, unable to do anything but pray to anyone who might be listening. "Please, please don't take her. Not after everything. Please." On the fourth breath, Hope gasped. A small, choking sound. Then she started crying, that thin, reedy wail that had become the most beautiful sound in the world. Rowan scooped her up, held her against his chest, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. "It's okay," he murmured, though Mara couldn't tell if he was talking to Hope or himself. "You're okay. Just breathe. Keep breathing." Mara pressed both hands over her mouth, trying not to fall apart completely. Hope's cries filled the cabin, angry and alive, and Mara had never been so grateful to hear a baby scream. "What happened?" she whispered when she could trust her voice. "What caused that?" "I don't know." Rowan was still holding Hope, still watching her breathe like he was afraid she'd stop again. "Could be anything. She's premature, her lungs might not be fully developed, or the cold, or—" He trailed off, his jaw tight. "I don't know." They stayed awake the rest of the night, taking turns holding Hope, watching her breathe. Every small sound she made, every shift in her breathing pattern sent Mara's heart racing. And from the way Rowan's shoulders stayed rigid, the way his eyes never left the baby, she knew he was just as terrified. Morning came gray and cold. Hope was nursing fitfully, still breathing, but something had changed. The close call had shown them how fragile this all was, how easily everything they'd fought for could slip away. "She needs a doctor," Mara said quietly. "Real medical care." "I know." Rowan set his untouched breakfast aside. "But the nearest doctor is in Iron Hollow, and there's still 4 feet of snow on the ground. We'd never make it with a newborn. So we just wait. Hope nothing like that happens again?" "What else can we do?" His voice was harsh with frustration. "I'm not a doctor, Mara. I delivered her because we had no choice, but I don't know how to fix this. I don't know—" He stopped, ran both hands through his hair. "I'm doing the best I can." I know you are." Mara shifted Hope to her other breast. "I'm sorry, I'm just scared." "So am I." The admission hung between them. Rowan stood abruptly, started pacing the small cabin like a caged animal. "We need to keep her warmer," he said finally. "Her body temperature drops, it could cause problems, and we need to watch her breathing, especially when she sleeps. One of us awake at all times. We can't sustain that. We'll both collapse. Then we take shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off." Rowan grabbed his coat. "I'm going to bring in more firewood, get the cabin as warm as we can without burning through all our fuel." He was gone before Mara could respond, leaving her alone with Hope and the crushing weight of responsibility. The baby had fallen asleep nursing, her tiny mouth still working even in sleep. Mara traced the curve of her cheek with one finger, marveled at how something so small could be so strong and so fragile at the same time. "You have to keep fighting," she whispered. "You hear me? You have to keep fighting, little one. We didn't come this far to lose you now." Hope slept on, oblivious to the fear and desperation in her mother's voice. The next week was the longest of Mara's life. They implemented Rowan's plan. 4-hour shifts, one person always awake to watch Hope breathe. Mara took the evening and early morning watches. Rowan took the night and afternoon. They moved through the cabin like ghosts, exhausted but hypervigilant. Every sound Hope made analyzed for signs of distress. The baby had 2 more episodes where her breathing became labored and shallow. Both times they managed to get her breathing again, rubbing her back, adjusting her position, once having Rowan breathe for her again until her lungs remembered what to do. Each time, Mara felt a piece of herself crack. Each time, she saw the same fear reflected in Rowan's eyes. "This isn't sustainable," she said on the 8th day, so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. "We're both falling apart." "I know." Rowan was heating water for tea, moving with the slow deliberation of someone running on fumes. "But what's the alternative?" "I don't know. But there has to be something better than this." He brought her the tea, sat down beside her on the bed where Hope was sleeping. The baby's breathing was steady for now, her small chest rising and falling in a regular rhythm that still looked too fast to Mara's inexperienced eyes. "When I was a kid," Rowan said quietly, "my mother used to tell me that the hardest part of caring about something was the fear. The knowledge that you could lose it at any moment and there wasn't a damn thing you could do to stop it." He stared into his cup. "I never really understood what she meant until now." "You care about her?" It wasn't a question. "Yeah, I do." He looked at Hope, his expression unguarded for once. "I didn't want to. Didn't want to get attached to anyone ever again. Seemed safer that way." A bitter laugh. "Turns out safety is overrated." Mara felt something warm unfold in her chest. "She's lucky to have you." "I'm the one who's lucky. I've been half alive up here for 5 years, just going through the motions. Then you two show up, and suddenly—" He shook his head. "Suddenly I remember what it feels like to actually give a damn about something besides survival." "Is that a good thing?" "Hell if I know, but it's something." Rowan finished his tea, set the cup aside. "You should sleep. It's my shift." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to stay awake and keep watching, but exhaustion was a physical weight pulling her down. She surrendered to it, letting sleep take her while Rowan kept watch. When she woke 4 hours later, she found him still sitting in the same position, Hope cradled in his arms. He was talking to her softly, telling her about the mountain, about the animals, about the way spring came late but fierce when it finally arrived. "You'll like spring," he was saying. "Everything comes alive, flowers everywhere, birds singing, deer coming down from the high country with their fawns. You'll be bigger then, strong enough to go outside, see it all for yourself." Mara lay still, listening. She'd never heard Rowan talk like this, gentle, almost hopeful, like he was making plans that extended beyond the next crisis, like he was imagining a future with them in it. "I know you're awake," Rowan said without turning around. "How?" "Your breathing changed." He glanced at her. "Hope's been good, steady breathing, ate a little bit ago. I think she's gaining weight." "Really?" "She feels heavier. Not much, but some." He stood carefully, brought the baby to Mara. "Here. Your turn." Mara took her daughter, felt the slight solidity of her that hadn't been there a week ago. Hope was still terrifyingly small, but maybe, just maybe, she was getting stronger. "Thank you," Mara said. "For everything. For caring." Rowan shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "She makes it easy." "So do you." He looked at her sharply. "Mara, oh, I mean it. I know this isn't what you wanted, but you've been good to us. Better than you had to be." "I haven't been anything special." "You have. You just don't see it." Mara shifted Hope to her shoulder. "Daniel was a good man, a kind man, but I don't think he would have fought for us the way you have. He would have tried his best, but when things got hard—" She paused, thinking about her late husband's gentle nature, his tendency to avoid conflict. "I think he would have given up, decided it was hopeless and just let it happen." "You don't know that." "Maybe not. But I know you haven't given up. Not once. Not even when any reasonable person would have." Mara met his eyes. "That means something." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to the fire, started preparing breakfast even though it was the middle of the night and neither of them was particularly hungry. "My mother died alone," he said finally. "I was in town, trading furs. By the time I got back to her house, she'd been gone for 2 days. His voice was flat, controlled. The neighbors knew she was sick. They heard her calling for help, but no one came. Because after my father died and I was the only one taking care of her, they decided we weren't worth their time anymore. Mara didn't say anything, just listened. That's when I realized that people in town would let you die if helping you was inconvenient. They'd stand by and do nothing, then show up at your funeral talking about what a shame it was. Rowan stirred the pot with more force than necessary. So when you showed up here, when I had to choose between helping you or turning you away, I knew what kind of person I wanted to be, and it wasn't like them. That's why you let me in. That's why I let you in. He glanced at her. And why I'm not giving up on hope, no matter how hard this gets. Because someone should have fought for my mother, should have stayed with her, made sure she wasn't alone, and I can't fix that. But I can make sure you two aren't alone. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Rowan, don't. He held up a hand. Don't make it into something it's not. I'm just doing what anyone decent would do. No. You're doing what you think anyone decent would do, but most people wouldn't. Mara looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully for once. Most people would have shut the door, would have said it wasn't their problem. You didn't. Rowan didn't respond, just went back to cooking. But Mara could see the slight relaxation in his shoulders, the way his mouth softened just a fraction. He'd been carrying that guilt about his mother for 5 years. Maybe, just maybe, helping them was giving him a way to carry it a little easier. Hope's breathing episodes gradually became less frequent over the next 2 weeks. She was growing, slowly but noticeably. Her tiny hands were starting to fill out, her face losing some of that alarming newborn gauntness. She was nursing better, sleeping longer stretches, crying with more vigor when something displeased her. The changes were subtle, but they were there. And with each small improvement, Mara felt the knot of constant terror in her chest loosen just slightly. Look at her, Rowan said one afternoon, watching Hope wave her fists in the air, 3 weeks old and already demanding attention. She's your daughter, Mara said without thinking, then froze. Rowan went very still. What? I didn't mean... Mara felt heat flood her face. I just meant that she's got your stubborn streak, the way she refuses to give up even when everything's against her, like you. She's not my daughter. Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. She's Daniel's. I know that. I wasn't suggesting... Mara stopped, took a breath. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. Silence stretched between them, awkward and heavy. Hope made a small sound, oblivious to the tension. She's got his eyes, Rowan said finally. Daniel's. Dark, like yours. But the shape is different, more like his. Mara looked at her daughter, trying to see Daniel in her features. It was hard. Hope was still so small, so undefined. But maybe around the eyes, maybe in the curve of her chin. I barely remember what he looked like, she admitted quietly. Isn't that terrible? It's only been 3 months, and already his face is fuzzy in my memory. That's not terrible. That's grief. Rowan picked up his carving, a small wooden figure he'd been working on for days. Your mind protects you from the things that hurt too much to remember clearly. Is that what happened with your mother? Yeah, I can remember her laugh, the way she hummed while she cooked, but her face... He shook his head. It's like trying to remember a dream. You know it was there, but the details slip away. Do you think Hope will remember Daniel? If I tell her about him? She'll remember what you tell her. Whether that's the same as remembering him, I don't know. Rowan tested the edge of his carving knife. But she'll know he existed, that he wanted her. That counts for something. Mara shifted Hope to her other arm. What am I going to tell her about all this? About you? The truth. That you nearly died and I helped because it was the right thing to do. He looked up. What else would you tell her? That you saved both our lives. That you've cared for her like she was your own. That somewhere along the way this stopped being temporary and started feeling like home. But Mara didn't say any of that. Just nodded and changed the subject. That night, winter reminded them it wasn't finished yet. The temperature dropped so low that frost formed inside the cabin despite the roaring fire. Wind screamed down the mountain, shaking the walls, finding every tiny gap to push cold air through. Mara bundled Hope in every soft thing she could find, but the baby's skin still felt too cool. We need more heat, Rowan said, feeding the fire until it blazed. But if we burn too much wood now, we won't have enough for the rest of winter. How much longer does winter last up here? 2 months. Maybe 3 if we're unlucky. He checked the wood supply with grim calculation. We've got enough if we're careful, but not if we have too many nights like this. As if in answer, another gust of wind slammed into the cabin. Something outside crashed, a tree branch maybe, or part of the shed roof. Hope started crying, thin and distressed. Mara tried to comfort her, but the baby wouldn't settle. She was cold despite all the blankets, her tiny body shivering. She needs more warmth, Mara said desperately. Direct body heat. Rowan didn't hesitate. He stripped off his heavy shirt, took Hope from Mara's arms, and tucked the baby against his bare chest. Then he wrapped both of them in blankets, creating a cocoon of warmth. Hope's crying gradually subsided. Her small body relaxed against Rowan's skin, drawing heat from him. Better? He asked quietly. I think so. Mara watched them together. This rough mountain man and the tiny baby he was sheltering with his own body. You're good at this. At what? Being a father. Rowan's jaw tightened. I'm not her father. You could be. The words hung in the cold air between them. Mara hadn't meant to say them, hadn't even realized she was thinking them until they were out. Mara, don't. Why not? You care about her. She responds to you. You're more present in her life than Daniel ever got to be. Because Daniel is dead. Rowan's voice was sharp. He didn't choose to leave. He wanted to be her father. I'm just the guy who happened to be here when you needed help. You're more than that and you know it. No, I don't know it. He adjusted the blankets around Hope carefully. I'm a temporary solution to a permanent problem. When spring comes, you'll go back to town or somewhere else, and Hope will grow up with a real family, not with some hermit who killed a man and ran away to the mountains. That's not who you are. What? That's exactly who I am. And you pretending otherwise doesn't change it. Rowan met her eyes, his expression hard. I'm helping you because someone should have helped my mother, because it's the decent thing to do. But don't mistake that for something it's not. Mara felt like she'd been slapped. Fine. I won't. They spent the rest of the night in tense silence, the only sounds the wind and Hope's small sleeping noises. Mara lay in the bed pretending to sleep while Rowan sat by the fire holding the baby, and the gulf between them felt wider than the mountain itself. But when morning came and the worst of the cold had passed, when Rowan gently handed Hope back to Mara so he could go check the trap lines, his hands lingered on the baby just a moment too long. And Mara knew, whatever he said, whatever walls he tried to build, he was already in too deep to walk away unchanged. The question was whether he'd ever admit it to himself. The days fell into a new pattern after that. Rowan pulled back, created distance where before there had been easy companionship. He was still helpful, still attentive to Hope's needs, but he stopped telling the baby stories about the mountain, stopped sitting close to Mara during meals, stopped meeting her eyes for longer than necessary. It hurt more than Mara wanted to admit. Did I do something wrong? She asked finally, unable to bear the silence anymore. Rowan was cleaning his rifle, the familiar movements almost meditative. No. Then why are you acting like I have? I'm not acting like anything. He set down the rifle. I'm just being realistic. You got comfortable here because you had to, but that doesn't mean this is permanent. I never said it was. You implied it, talking about me being Hope's father, about what you'd tell her. He shook his head. You're building something in your head that can't exist in reality. Why can't it? Because I live alone on a mountain, Mara. That's not a life for a baby, not a life for you either. Shouldn't that be my decision? It should be a rational decision, not one made because you're grateful and scared and have nowhere else to go. Rowan stood, paced to the window. When spring comes, you'll see things clearly. You'll realize that staying here isn't what you want. You don't know what I want. Neither do you, not yet. He turned to face her. You think you want this because it's safe, because I helped you and Hope survived, and that feels like enough. But it's not. You deserve more than just survival. So do you. Maybe. But I made my peace with this life a long time ago. His voice was final. You haven't. And I'm not going to let you trap yourself here because you're confusing gratitude with something else. Mara wanted to argue. wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she knew exactly what she felt and why. But the words stuck in her throat because maybe, just maybe, he had a point. She was grateful. She was scared. And she didn't have anywhere else to go. Did that mean her feelings weren't real, or just that they were complicated? Fine, she said quietly. We'll wait for spring. See how things look then. Good. But as Rowan went back to his rifle and Mara went back to nursing Hope, the distance between them felt less like safety and more like loss. A week later, Hope smiled for the first time. It was brief, just a tiny upward curve of her mouth while Mara was changing her, but it was there, definite and real and absolutely beautiful. "Rowan, look!" Mara called without thinking. She smiled. He came over, looked down at the baby, and his whole face softened despite his efforts to maintain distance. "Do it again, little bit," he murmured. "Come on, show off for us." Hope stared up at him with those serious dark eyes. Then, as if she'd been waiting for permission, she smiled again. Bigger this time, a gummy grin that lit up her whole face. Rowan laughed. Actually laughed, a sound Mara had heard maybe twice since she'd known him. "Well, damn," he said, "let's look at you, 5 weeks old and already working your charm. She likes you. She likes anyone who feeds her and keeps her warm. No, she likes you specifically." Mara finished diapering Hope, picked her up. "Watch, she smiles more when you're around." "That's not—" But Hope proved Mara right by smiling up at Rowan again, her tiny hand reaching toward his face. He caught her hand gently, let her wrap her fingers around his thumb. For a moment, all his carefully constructed distance crumbled, and Mara could see everything he was trying to hide. Affection, fear, hope, loss, all tangled up together. "I can't do this," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Fall in love with her." He pulled his hand back gently, stepped away. "Because when spring comes and you leave, it's gonna—" He stopped. "I just can't. Rowan, I'm gonna check the trap lines. There's leftover stew from yesterday if you get hungry." Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone with Hope and the heavy knowledge that they'd already broken something that maybe couldn't be fixed. Hope cooed softly, oblivious to the pain her small existence was causing. Mara held her daughter close and tried not to think about spring, about choices that would have to be made, about the mountain man who'd saved their lives but wouldn't let himself be saved in return. Outside, winter held on tight, but inside the cabin, the cracks were starting to show, and Mara wasn't sure if they'd survive the thaw. Spring came slowly to the mountain, like it was reluctant to commit. First, the icicles started dripping during the day, refreezing at night. Then patches of brown earth appeared where the snow had been deepest. Birds returned, tentative at first, then in greater numbers, filling the silence with songs Mara had almost forgotten existed. Hope was 2 months old now, stronger and healthier than Mara had dared hope. She'd gained weight, filled out into a proper baby instead of the fragile thing she'd been at birth. Her eyes tracked movement, her hands grasped deliberately, and she'd started making sounds that were almost like talking, babbles and coos that filled the cabin with life. But the tension between Mara and Rowan had only gotten worse. He was pulling away more each day, spending longer hours outside, coming back exhausted and silent. They moved around each other like strangers sharing space, all the easy companionship they'd built buried under unspoken words and careful distance. "The pass will be clear in a few weeks," Rowan said one morning, not looking at her. "Maybe less if this warm spell holds." Mara's stomach tightened. "That soon?" "Yeah." He was packing supplies for a trip to check the far trap lines, an overnight journey he'd put off all winter. "You should start thinking about what you want to do, where you want to go." "I don't know where to go." "Town's the obvious choice. You could find work maybe. Someone might take you in until you get on your feet." "The same town that exiled me to a cabin in the woods and hoped I'd die quietly?" Mara shifted Hope to her other hip. "That town? Things might be different now. People feel guilty when their cruelty doesn't kill you fast enough." His voice was bitter. "They might actually help this time. Or they might not. Then go somewhere else. There are other towns, cities even, places where no one knows you, where you can start fresh." Rowan finally looked at her, his expression carefully blank. "Point is, you have options. You're not trapped here." "What if I want to be here?" "You don't. You just think you do because it's familiar now." He shouldered his pack. "I'll be back tomorrow night. There's food in the cellar, plenty of firewood. You'll be fine." "Rowan, wait." But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that felt like punctuation on a conversation they'd been avoiding for weeks. Mara stood there holding Hope, listening to his footsteps fade into the forest, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "What do we do?" she whispered to her daughter. "How do we fix this?" Hope gurgled and grabbed Mara's hair, oblivious to the question. That night, alone in the cabin for the first time since Hope's birth, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed that smelled like Rowan, pine and smoke and something earthier, and tried to imagine leaving. Tried to picture herself in Iron Hollow or some other town, starting over with nothing but a baby and the clothes on her back. The image wouldn't form. Every time she tried, she just saw this cabin, this mountain, this life they'd accidentally built together. But Rowan was right about one thing. She was confusing gratitude with something else. Wasn't she? He'd saved her life. Of course she felt something for him. That didn't mean it was real. Didn't mean it would last once survival wasn't forcing them together. Except it felt real. The way her heart lifted when he smiled at Hope. The way she'd started listening for his footsteps, relaxing when she heard them. The way his rare touches, helping her up, steadying her on ice. That one time he'd brushed her hair back from her face when she was too exhausted to move, felt like the only thing anchoring her to the world. That wasn't just gratitude, but maybe it wasn't enough either. Hope woke crying around midnight. Mara fed her, changed her, walked her around the small cabin until she settled. Then she sat by the fire with her daughter asleep on her chest and let herself cry for the first time in weeks. For Daniel, who deserved better than dying young. For the life she'd lost. For the impossible situation she was in now, caught between a town that didn't want her and a man who refused to let her stay. And for herself, for being stupid enough to fall for someone who'd made it clear from the beginning that this was temporary. When Rowan returned the next evening, he found Mara making dinner with Hope strapped to her chest in a sling she'd fashioned from an old blanket. "You're back," she said, not turning from the pot she was stirring. "I am." He set down his pack, shook snow from his coat. "How was she?" "Good. Fussy last night, but that's normal." "And you?" "Fine." The lie sat between them. They both knew it was a lie. Neither acknowledged it. Dinner was quiet. Hope dozed in her cradle while Mara and Rowan ate without really tasting anything. The silence was oppressive, heavy with things neither of them would say. Finally, Mara couldn't take it anymore. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Doing what?" "Pushing me away. Acting like you can't wait for us to leave." She set down her spoon. "If you really wanted us gone, you would have said so weeks ago. But you keep helping, keep caring for Hope, keep—" She gestured helplessly. "Keep acting like this matters to you." "It does matter, that's the problem." Rowan stood abruptly, started pacing. "Don't you see? The more I care, the harder it's going to be when you leave. And you are going to leave, Mara. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but eventually you'll realize this isn't the life you want." "Stop telling me what I want." "Someone has to, because you're not thinking clearly." He turned to face her. "You almost died getting here. Hope almost died being born. You've spent months in survival mode, and now you're mistaking relief for happiness. But this," he gestured at the cabin, "this isn't a life, it's barely existence. You deserve better." "What if I think you deserve better too?" Rowan laughed, a harsh sound. "I'm a man who killed someone and ran away. I've been hiding on this mountain for 5 years because I'm too much of a coward to face the world. What exactly do I deserve?" "A second chance." Mara stood to face him. "You're not a coward. You're not a killer. You're someone who defended himself and paid for it anyway. Someone who chose solitude over being treated like a monster." She took a step closer. "And for what it's worth, you've shown me more kindness in 3 months than most people showed me in my entire marriage." "That's not—" "Mara, don't compare me to Daniel. He was a good man." He was. But he was also weak in ways that mattered. When things got hard, he'd just fold, accept whatever life handed him. She thought about Gerald dividing up the estate, about the cabin on the ridge, about all the times Daniel had chosen peace over fighting for what was right. You don't do that. You fight, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Fighting doesn't make me a better man. Maybe not, but it makes you the kind of man I want raising my daughter." The words hung in the air between them. Rowan stared at her like she'd slapped him. "You don't mean that," he said finally. "I do." Mara's voice was steady despite her hammering heart. "I know it's complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons this doesn't make sense, but Hope needs a father, Rowan, and you're already acting like one, whether you admit it or not. She had a father. He died. And now she has you, if you want her." Mara waited, barely breathing. "Do you want her?" Rowan looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. His whole body was tense, every muscle drawn tight like he was bracing for a blow. "More than anything," he whispered, "but that doesn't mean—" "It means everything." Mara closed the distance between them, put her hand on his arm. "I'm not asking you to replace Daniel. I'm asking you to be present, to stop running from this because you're scared of getting hurt." "I'm not scared of getting hurt. I'm scared of hurting you." Rowan's voice was rough. "What happens when you wake up one day and realize you settled, that you stayed with me because you had no other options, not because you actually wanted this life? What happens when you wake up one day and realize you pushed away the best thing that ever happened to you because you were too stubborn to take a risk?" They stood there inches apart, both breathing hard. Hope made a small sound in her sleep, and they both glanced at her automatically, a synchronized movement that spoke of weeks of shared parenting. "I don't know how to do this," Rowan said finally. "How to be what you need. Neither do I. But we can figure it out together." Mara's hand was still on his arm. She could feel his pulse hammering under her fingers. "If you want to." "Mara." He raised his hand, hesitated, then touched her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I'm not good at this. At people. At feelings. You're better at it than you think. I'll mess it up. Probably, so will I." She leaned into his touch. "But at least we'll mess it up together." Rowan searched her face like he was looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that she didn't mean this. Whatever he found there must have satisfied him, because he finally pulled her close and kissed her. It wasn't smooth or practiced. Their noses bumped. The angle was wrong at first, and Mara was so surprised she forgot to breathe. But then Rowan's arms came around her, solid and sure, and she melted into him like coming home. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "This is insane," he muttered. "Completely. We barely know each other. We know the important things." Mara's hands fisted in his shirt. "We know how to survive together, how to fight for each other. That's more than most people start with." "Your husband's been dead less than 6 months. I know. And I'll always love him for giving me hope. But he's gone, Rowan, and I'm still here, still alive." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life mourning what I lost. I want to build something new. With me. With you." Rowan kissed her again, slower this time, like he was memorizing the feel of her. When Hope started fussing, he broke away reluctantly and went to pick her up. "Hey, little bit," he murmured, settling her against his shoulder. "Did we wake you? Sorry about that." Hope blinked at him, her small fist working its way into her mouth. Rowan walked her around the cabin, swaying gently, completely unself-conscious about the way he cradled her tiny body. Mara watched them together and felt something settle into place. This was right. Messy and complicated and probably doomed to be difficult, but right in a way that mattered. "So what now?" Rowan asked, still swaying with hope. "You're really staying, even when the past clears?" "I'm staying, if you'll have us." "Mara, I'd have you even if you were the worst decision I ever made." He looked at her over Hope's head. "You probably are, but I don't care anymore." "Romantic. I'm not a romantic person. You deliver babies and save lives and rock infants to sleep at 2 a.m. You're more romantic than you think." Rowan snorted but didn't argue. Hope had fallen back asleep on his shoulder, her mouth slack, her breathing deep and even. "We should probably talk about practical things," Mara said, "like how this actually works. Living arrangements, what we tell people, how we—" "Later." Rowan transferred Hope to her cradle carefully, then came back to Mara. "Right now I just want to enjoy this without worrying about logistics." He pulled her close again, and Mara let herself lean into him. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, listening to Hope breathe and the fire crackle and the wind outside that had finally lost its winter teeth. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The snow melted in earnest, revealing a world Mara hadn't seen since autumn. Green things pushed up through mud. Animals emerged from wherever they'd hidden all winter. The sun actually felt warm on her skin. Rowan started teaching her the things she'd need to know to really live on the mountain. Not just survive, but thrive. How to identify edible plants, how to preserve food for next winter, how to read the weather, track animals, navigate by landmarks. "You're a terrible student," he observed one afternoon, watching her struggle with a snare. "I'm doing my best." "Your best is pretty bad." Mara threw a pine cone at him. He caught it easily, grinning, an expression she was seeing more and more often. "Just show me again," she said, slowly this time. He did, his hands guiding hers through the motions. They'd gotten more comfortable with touching over the past weeks. Nothing dramatic. Rowan still slept by the fire most nights, still maintained careful boundaries. But there were more casual contacts, hands brushing when they passed things, his arm around her shoulders when she was cold, her head on his shoulder while they watched Hope sleep. Small intimacies that felt bigger than they should. "You're getting better," Rowan admitted, examining her third attempt at the snare. "Still not great, but better." "High praise from you." "I don't lie about important things." He helped her to her feet. "Come on, Hope's going to wake up hungry soon, and I want to show you the creek before she does." They walked through the forest together, Rowan pointing out signs of spring that Mara never would have noticed on her own. A deer trail, fresh bear scat, a tree marked by a mountain lion. "Is it safe?" Mara asked, eyeing the deep claw marks. "Relatively. Big cats usually avoid people. Just don't go wandering alone at dusk or dawn." He paused. "Actually, maybe don't go wandering alone, period, until you know the mountain better." "Worried about me?" "Always." The simple honesty of it made Mara's chest tight. She slipped her hand into his, felt his fingers close around hers. When they reached the creek, swollen with snowmelt, Rowan showed her where the best fishing spots would be once the water calmed. Where to find watercress, which rocks to avoid because they were slippery. "This is your classroom now," he said. "Everything you need to know is out here. You just have to pay attention." "I am paying attention. You're watching me, not the forest." "Can I do both?" Rowan's mouth quirked. "I suppose. But if you trip over a root because you're too busy staring, I'm going to say I told you so." Noted. They made it back to the cabin without incident. Hope was awake and angry about it, her cries audible from 50 feet away. "Someone's hungry," Rowan said, quickening his pace. Inside, Mara fed Hope while Rowan started dinner. It was a routine they'd fallen into without discussion, comfortable and domestic in a way that still surprised Mara sometimes. She'd had this with Daniel, but it had felt different, more obligatory, like they were playing roles they'd been assigned. This felt real, like they were building something that belonged to them. "I need to go to town," Rowan said after dinner, not meeting her eyes. "Soon. We're running low on things I can't make or trap." Mara's stomach nodded. "How soon?" "Few days, maybe. Pass should be clear by then." "What will you tell people? About us?" "The truth. That I took in a pregnant widow during a storm, and she decided to stay." He finally looked at her. "Unless you want me to lie." "No, I just—" Mara shifted Hope to her other breast. "I don't want to make trouble for you. There's going to be talk regardless. Might as well give them the real story instead of letting them invent worse ones." Rowan added wood to the fire. "You could come with me, if you wanted." "To town?" "Yeah, face everyone together. Show them you're alive, Hope's alive, and you made your choice." Mara thought about it. About walking back into Iron Hollow with her head high, Hope in her arms, Rowan at her side. About facing Gerald and Catherine and everyone else who'd written her off as dead or pathetic, or both. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." Rowan looked surprised. "Really?" "Really. I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting other people decide my worth." She looked down at Hope, nursing contentedly. "I survived. We survived. They should know that. They're not going to be happy about it." "I don't care if they're happy. I care that they know I'm not ashamed." Mara met his eyes. "Are you? Ashamed of this?" "No." The answer was immediate and firm. I'm a lot of things about this situation, but ashamed isn't one of them. Good. Then we go to town. Together. They left 3 days later as soon as Rowan judged the pass safe enough for travel. Hope rode in a sling against Mara's chest, bundled against the cool morning air. Rowan led the way on foot, carrying trade goods in a pack and keeping watch for any lingering ice patches. The trip took most of the day. Mara's body, still recovering from pregnancy and birth, protested every step. But she kept moving, kept following Rowan down the mountain, because turning back now would feel like retreat. And she was done retreating. Iron Hollow looked exactly the same as it had 4 months ago. Same buildings, same muddy streets, same people going about their business. But Mara felt completely different. The woman who'd left here had been broken, terrified, certain she was going to die. The woman coming back knew exactly what she was made of. "You ready?" Rowan asked quietly. "No, but let's do it anyway." They walked into town together, and the stares started immediately. People stopped mid-conversation. Storekeepers came to their doorways. Someone actually dropped a basket, vegetables rolling into the street. Mara kept her head up and kept walking. "Mara?" Catherine's voice, shocked and uncertain. Are you?" "I'm alive," Mara said, stopping to face her old friend. "We both are." Catherine's eyes went to Hope, then to Rowan, then back to Mara. "I thought, everyone said I'd die in that cabin." "I know." Mara adjusted Hope's sling. "They were wrong." "But how did you— the baby came early, didn't she? How did you manage—" "She had help." Rowan's voice was quiet but carried. "And before anyone asks or spreads rumors, yes, Mara's been staying with me. Yes, I delivered the baby when she went into early labor. And yes, she's staying with me permanently now." The silence that followed was absolute. Mara could practically hear the judgment forming, the assumptions being made. Then Gerald pushed through the crowd, his face red with fury. "You can't be serious," he said to Mara. "Living in sin with that murderer." "He was acquitted," Mara said calmly. "And even if he wasn't, he saved my life and Hope's life, which is more than anyone in this town was willing to do. We provided for you, gave you a cabin. You gave me a death trap and hoped I'd disappear quietly." Mara's voice was steel. "Don't pretend it was charity. You wanted me gone so you could have Daniel's house and business without guilt." Gerald sputtered, but he couldn't quite deny it. Around them, people shifted uncomfortably. "The cabin on the ridge collapsed during the first big storm," Rowan added. "Full roof failure. If Mara had been there when it happened, she and the baby would have been buried alive." More uncomfortable shifting. Someone in the crowd muttered something about Providence. "I didn't come here to make you feel guilty," Mara said, addressing the crowd now. "I came to let you know I'm alive, that Hope is alive, and that we're building a life on the mountain with Rowan." She paused. "I also came to tell you that if you ever see me in town again, I expect to be treated with the same respect you'd give anyone else. I'm not your charity case. I'm not your shame. I'm just a woman who survived what you all assumed would kill her." She turned to Rowan. "Can we go? I want to finish the trading and get home before dark." "Yeah, let's go." They walked to the general store together, leaving shocked silence in their wake. Inside, the shopkeeper, an older man named Morris, stared at them with undisguised surprise. "Mara Dalton," he said slowly. "Well, I'll be damned. We all thought—" "I know what you thought." Mara set her list on the counter. "Can you fill this order or not?" Morris looked at the list, looked at Rowan, looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her sling. Yeah, I can fill it." He paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you made it. I felt bad about the whole situation. Should have said something at the time." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry for that. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. But it was something." "Thank you," Mara said quietly. "I appreciate the honesty." They left Iron Hollow an hour later, packs full of supplies, Hope fed and dry, the worst of the confrontation behind them. The walk back up the mountain felt lighter somehow, like they'd shed a weight neither of them had realized they were carrying. "That went better than expected," Rowan observed. "Did it? People looked at us like we'd grown second heads." "Yeah, but no one threw anything. I count that as a win." He glanced at her. "You okay?" "I'm fine." Actually, I'm better than fine. Mara shifted Hope's weight. I spent so long being afraid of what people thought, trying to be acceptable, trying to fit in. But standing there telling them the truth, she smiled. It felt good, like taking back something they'd stolen. Your power. My power, she agreed. They can judge all they want. It doesn't change anything. We're still going to be up on that mountain, living our lives, raising hope. They can accept it or not. Their choice doesn't matter. Rowan caught her hand, squeezed it. I'm proud of you. For what? For being braver than I ever was. I ran from town and hid. You walked back in and faced them down. We faced them down, Mara corrected. Together. Together, he agreed. They made it back to the cabin by dusk. Rowan built up the fire while Mara fed Hope and changed her into sleeping clothes. The baby had been remarkably good all day, but now she was fussy, overstimulated from all the new sights and sounds. Come here, little bit, Rowan said, taking her from Mara. Let's give your mama a break. He walked Hope around the cabin, humming something tuneless, while Mara prepared a late dinner. She watched them together, this gruff mountain man and the tiny baby who'd wrapped him completely around her finger, and felt overwhelmingly grateful for the series of desperate choices that had brought them all here. After dinner, after Hope finally fell asleep, after the fire had burned down to coals and the cabin was quiet, Rowan pulled Mara close on the bed they'd started sharing a week ago. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For choosing this. For choosing me. He pressed a kiss to her hair. I know it's not easy. Living up here, dealing with my moods, learning everything from scratch. Nothing worth having is easy. Mara settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Besides, you're stuck with us now. Hope loves you too much to leave. Just Hope? Maybe not just Hope. She felt him smile against her hair. They lay like that for a while, comfortable in the silence, until Mara worked up the courage to say what she'd been thinking for weeks. I love you, Rowan Hale. I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I do. He went very still. Then, that is crazy. We've known each other 4 months. I know. 4 months of crisis and survival. Not exactly the best foundation. I know that too. So you understand that this feeling might just be, it's not just anything. Mara pushed up on her elbow to look at him. I know what gratitude feels like, what dependency feels like. This isn't that. This is me choosing you every day because I want to. Because you make me laugh. Because you're good with hope. Because you're honest and grumpy and you pretend not to care, but you care more than anyone I've ever met. Rowan stared at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I'm not good at this, he said finally, at saying things. Daniel's gone. And I loved him. But what we had was different, quieter, safer. Mara touched his face. This scares me sometimes. How much I feel. How much I want this to work. But I'd rather be scared and alive than safe and numb. You make it sound simple. It is simple. I love you. You love hope. We build from there. I do love hope, Rowan admitted, from the moment she was born, even though I tried not to. He pulled Mara back down against him. And I love you too, even though it's insane and probably doomed and definitely too fast. So we're both crazy. Apparently. Good. Mara closed her eyes, feeling more settled than she had in months. I'd rather be crazy with you than sane with anyone else. Summer came to the mountain like an explosion of life. Wildflowers everywhere, the creek running clear and cool, animals raising their young in the thick forest. Hope grew stronger every day, her personality emerging, stubborn like Mara, serious like Rowan, determined like them both. Rowan built an addition onto the cabin, giving them more space. Mara planted a garden, learning through trial and error what would grow at this elevation. They worked together to build up stores for the next winter, but it felt different now. Not desperate survival, but careful preparation for a life they were choosing. People from town came occasionally, Morris bringing extra supplies he said were overstocked. Jim Carver checking in to make sure they were managing. Even Catherine once, bringing baby clothes her own children had outgrown, and an apology she could barely get out through tears. Mara accepted the offerings with grace, but didn't soften completely. These people had abandoned her when she needed them most. Forgiveness was possible, but forgetting wasn't. One evening in late summer, with Hope asleep in her cradle and the sun setting gold over the mountains, Rowan pulled Mara outside to the small porch he'd built. "I made you something," he said, sounding uncertain. He handed her a small wooden box, smoothed and oiled until it shone. Inside was a ring, simple, carved from dark wood, polished to a soft gleam. "It's not fancy," Rowan said quickly. "And I know we're not. I don't know if you even want to." "Yes," Mara interrupted. "I haven't asked yet." "I don't care. The answer's yes." Rowan laughed, that rare, full laugh she loved. "You're supposed to let me do this properly." "Fine. Ask properly." He took her hand, suddenly serious. "Mara Dalton, will you marry me? Will you stay here on this mountain and build a life with me and let me be Hope's father and drive you crazy for the next 50 years? "Yes to all of it." Mara let him slide the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since that day in town when you told everyone exactly what you thought of them. I figured anyone brave enough to do that was brave enough to take me on permanently." "I'm brave or I'm stupid. Maybe both." "Definitely both." Rowan pulled her close, kissed her thoroughly. "But you're mine. That's all that matters." They married in late fall, before the snow came. Jim Carver brought up a minister who asked minimal questions and seemed more amused than judgmental about the whole situation. Morris and his wife came, bringing food and well wishes. Even a few other townspeople made the trip, people who'd stayed silent during Mara's exile but were trying, in their own way, to make amends. Hope was the flower girl, carried down the short aisle by Rowan since she was only 8 months old and couldn't walk yet. She grabbed at Mara's dress during the vows, making everyone laugh. "I do," Mara said, looking at Rowan in his cleaned and mended best clothes, seeing the man who'd saved her life and then given her a reason to want to keep living it. "I do," Rowan echoed, his voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide. The celebration was small but genuine. People ate and drank and told stories. Hope was passed around like a treasure, soaking up attention with delighted babbles. And when it was all over and everyone had made their way back down the mountain, Mara and Rowan stood on their porch watching the stars emerge. "Mrs. Hale," Rowan said, testing out the name. "I like it." Mara leaned against him. "Though I'll probably still sign things Dalton sometimes, for Hope's sake, so she knows where she came from. That's fair? She should know about Daniel, that he was her father, that he wanted her, that he would have loved her." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I'm not trying to replace him." "I know. You're not replacing anyone. You're just being who you are." Mara turned to face him. "Hope's lucky. She gets 2 fathers, one who gave her life and one who fights to keep her alive every day. Not many kids get that. She gets one hell of a mother, too. Don't sell yourself short." They went inside together, checked on Hope sleeping soundly in the expanded cabin, and climbed into their marriage bed in the room Rowan had built just for this. Outside, winter was coming. But inside, they had everything they needed. Hope turned one in late spring, taking her first wobbling steps between Mara and Rowan while they cheered like she'd climbed the mountain itself. She was talking now. Simple words, but clear enough. Mama and Dada and No, which was rapidly becoming her favorite. "She's definitely yours," Rowan observed, watching Hope refuse to put on her shoes with impressive stubbornness. "She's definitely ours," Mara corrected. "That stubbornness is pure Hale." "Hale Dalton," Rowan said. "We agreed." "Hale Dalton," Mara agreed. "Best of both worlds." They'd had Hope's name legally changed, Hope Hale Dalton, carrying both families forward. It had required a trip to the county seat and some paperwork, but it was done. Official, real. A year and a half after Mara had stumbled through a blizzard to Rowan's door, they'd built something that looked remarkably like a family. Not perfect. They still fought sometimes, still struggled with the isolation, still had moments where the weight of their choices felt crushing. But they fought together, struggled together, carried the weight together. And slowly, the people of Iron Hollow stopped seeing them as the scandal and started seeing them as what they were. A family who'd survived impossible odds and come out stronger for it. Mara never forgot what it felt like to be cast out, to be written off as weak and worthless. She carried that knowledge with her, let it fuel the work she started doing with other women in difficult situations, offering advice, offering shelter when she could, offering proof that survival was possible even when everyone said it wasn't. Rowan stayed wary of town, but he came down more often, traded regularly. even accepted a commission to build furniture for Morris's store, his skill with wood finally getting recognition. And Hope grew up knowing she was loved by two parents who'd chosen each other and her every single day, despite everything that said they shouldn't. On a summer evening 3 years after that first desperate walk through the snow, Mara sat on the porch watching Hope chase butterflies in the meadow, while Rowan worked on expanding the garden. The cabin had grown, more rooms, a proper workshop for Rowan, a small schoolroom where Mara taught Hope letters and numbers. This was her life now. Not the one she'd planned, not the one she'd thought she wanted, but the one she'd fought for, survived for, chosen for herself, when everyone else had given up on her. She thought about the woman she'd been, soft, uncertain, desperate, and she thought about who she'd become, strong, determined, unbreakable. The mountain had tested her. The winter had nearly killed her. The birth had pushed her to limits she didn't know existed. But she'd survived it all. Not just survived, thrived. And in the process, she'd learned the most important lesson of her life, that worth isn't given by others. It's not determined by your size, your circumstances, or your past. It's not about being perfect or acceptable or fitting into someone else's idea of what you should be. Worth is what you claim for yourself, what you fight for, what you refuse to surrender no matter how many people tell you to give up. Mara had claimed her worth on a frozen mountain in the middle of winter, had fought for it with every step, every breath, every moment she chose to keep living. And now, watching her daughter play and her husband work and the sun set gold over the mountains they called home, she knew exactly how much she was worth. Everything. She was worth everything she'd fought for and everything she'd built from the ashes of her old life. And no one, not the town, not the past, not even her own doubts, could ever take that away from her again. "Mama!" Hope called, running toward her with a flower clutched in her small fist. "Look what I found!" "It's beautiful, baby." Mara pulled her daughter close, breathed in the scent of sunshine and grass and pure joy. "Just like you." Rowan looked up from his work, caught her eye, smiled that rare full smile that still made her heart skip. This was worth it. All of it. Every desperate moment, every terrifying choice, every impossible obstacle. This life they'd built from nothing but survival and stubbornness and refusing to give up. This was everything, and it was enough.